New data suggests that hiring has never been this bad. Year-to-date announcements by U.S. employers are down 40% compared to just last year. That's lower than even the first 8 months of 2008. It's the worst in 20 years of data. Contrary to popular perception, recession is all about hiring, not firing. When hiring vanishes, that's the trigger. The layoffs come later on, and during the past several recessions over the last 30 years, layoffs don't show up until much later. Unemployment starts to rise and goes up significantly because employers stop adding workers. And there is a ton of research which shows business cycles aren't determined by layoffs. Those are just a byproduct. And it directly contradicts another myth that's been circulating recently, going back to the spring, that the unemployment rate is rising for good reasons. Even the FOMC's past statement and speeches by its members have referenced that we shouldn't worry about the unemployment rate because it isn't being driven by layoffs. Even Claudia Sahm of Sahm Rule infamy has said so herself. It's the lack of hiring that causes the downturn to spiral, leading to a slowdown in spending, which is just what we're seeing. Today's retail sales report for August that the media took to be positive. When is the mainstream ever not anything but glowingly positive about the economy? Today's retail sales report was actually another confirmation along the same lines as what we're seeing in hiring. Retail sales right now are consistent with the recession danger zone. Recessions happen when nominal retail sales get under 3%, and sales have been consistently under that level all year. They don't even need to contract because what really matters is volumes. Real retail sales have been sliding lower, and that's the key. Just like hiring is the critical measure of the labor market, real retail sales are what you need to pay attention to in terms of actual spending. We got both of those today. Grim news on hiring and retail sales that are in the danger zone. And then everybody in the mainstream and elsewhere who told you that everything was fine all year, now they're going to move the goalposts and say, well, it's just a little minor slowdown. The unemployment rate's rising, but for positive reasons. Nothing could be further from the truth. Now, we may get layoffs and we may get crashing nominal spending like everyone pictures of a recession, but we're still in the early stages. And all the data continues to confirm that we are in the early stages, starting with hiring. Now, we've been talking about hiring all along, especially where it comes to JOLTS, the government's data on specifically hiring. In the JOLTS survey, most people pay attention to job openings, which is one of the most worthless statistics there is. It's really the hiring number that should stand out. That's the one that people need to focus on. And what it has been saying is that over the last year, hiring has absolutely crashed. And now we get confirmation from another data source. Challenger, Gray, and Christmas, which keeps track of layoff announcements as well as hiring announcements, said that there was a bit of a bump in layoffs during the month of August 2024. According to their numbers, the number of announced job cuts was 75,891, which, by the way, is already the most for any August outside of 2020 in their data, which goes back 20 years. So already not a good sign. And that's a 193% increase from July, but there's seasonality to layoffs. They tend to go down during the summer months. So layoffs over the last couple of years have been holding at pretty substantial numbers, certainly compared to the 2010s as well as 2021 into 2022. Yet, most people say there's no recession because recession is really about the other side of things, the hiring side. The layoffs, the real mass layoffs, they come after businesses are done hoarding workers. They don't want to fire workers. However, when confronted with weakness in the general economy, what they will do is cut hours of the workers they do have in certain cases. But what's the easiest thing to do overall is to simply not hire anyone else, to go with the payrolls that you have and the employees that you have at the time. According to Challenger, Gray, and Christmas, U.S. employers have announced 79,697 hiring plans, down 41% from the 135,980 plans recorded through August last year. The year-to-date total is the lowest since Challenger began tracking in 2005. The previous lowest total through August occurred in 2008, when 80,387 hiring plans were announced. So in 2024 so far, we're tracking below 2008 levels in terms of hiring. That's how weak the economy's been, and we continue to see evidence of it. Economic data as well as corporate reports. They keep warning about customers and consumers and spending, which I'll get to at the end of this video. Even the New York Times is forced to confront the fact that there's something wrong with the economy. Everybody pictures a recession as massive amounts of job cuts. That's what everybody worries about, the massive amounts of layoffs, because unemployment begets unemployment, which begets unemployment. That's according to Andrew Challenger, who's the senior vice president at Challenger Gray and Christmas, which is an outplacement firm that tracks labor data, as I just went over. Unemployment can rise even without a surge in layoffs. What really distinguishes a recession isn't job losses, but a slowdown in hiring. That may be counterintuitive given how synonymous recessions and job losses are in the popular imagination. Layoffs happen even in a healthy economy, but when people lose their job in recession, they struggle to find new ones. Quote, when a hiring manager decides not to fill a position, that doesn't tend to make headlines the way a plant closing might, said Robert Shimer, who's a University of Chicago economist. But those decisions, multiplied across the economy, can lead to rising joblessness. And by the way, Eurodollar University has subscriptions available where we go over a lot more than we do here on YouTube, and the stuff that we do cover on YouTube, we get into a lot more detail. That's why we call it Eurodollar University's Deep Dive Analysis, where every day we go deep into these topics and a whole bunch of others that we don't get to go over here on YouTube. We have subscriptions available at our website. You can check out all the information at eurodollar.university. Robert Shimer isn't just some generic economist that they pulled off the street. In 2005, he authored one of the most important studies on recession business cycles and how they react and how they impact the labor market, more so where they come from. Contrary to popular belief, as he was saying, it's not layoffs that lead to the downturn. And it has over 1,750 citations, so this is a pretty popular as well as thoroughly established piece of research. And what he said was basically just what we said in the New York Times article and what I've been saying all along. The data shows that cyclicality is determined by when businesses stop hiring new employees, because there's always churn in the labor market. There are always people who are being separated from their positions, either voluntarily or involuntarily. And when you're involuntarily separated from an employment opportunity during a boom period, it's easy to go and find another one. So maybe you're unemployed for a little bit. That's certainly an inconvenience, but it isn't overall devastating to the economy. What happens during recessions in the early stages of recession, as Shimer showed, is that businesses stop hiring. Therefore, the number of unemployed that are become unemployed and involuntarily separated from their jobs start to pile up. And that piling up where they can't find a new job leads to the consequences that we see: reduction in spending, therefore further reductions in hiring, the vicious cycle of recession. What Shimer wrote in 2005 was, using United States data from 1948 to 2004, I find that there are substantial fluctuations in unemployed workers' job finding probability at business cycle frequencies, while employed workers' separation probability is comparative acyclic. This is particularly true in the last 2 decades, during which period the separation probability has steadily declined despite 2 spikes in the unemployment rate, both recessions. In other words, virtually all of the increase in unemployment and decrease in employment during the 1991 and 2000 recessions was a consequence of a reduction in the job finding probability. So you get separated for whatever reasons, doesn't have to be cyclical reasons, but when you can't find a job because businesses aren't hiring, that's what leads to recession. As he was saying, that's the cycle frequency that matches what we see in recession statistics all over the economy. I argue this misinterpretation, that being that layoffs are the cause of recession, has profoundly influenced the development of macroeconomic models of the labor market during the past 15 years, including such well-known papers as Mortensen and Pissarides, and Caballero and Hamur. Subsequent research is focused on the cause of job loss during recessions rather than the difficulty of finding a job. So when hiring starts to really stall out and go down, potentially really shut down, that's when you need to be concerned about recession. The layoffs don't determine the business cycle. The layoffs come as a final confirmation. As Shimer was saying in the New York Times article, as Mr. Challenger was saying in the same New York Times article, by the time you get to the layoffs, it's already way too late. So when you downplay the fact that businesses aren't hiring, it's just, well, it's no big deal, they're not hiring, you're simply whistling past the economic graveyard. You're overstating the case, the health, the resilience of the economy at the expense of what's actually happening. Call it a vibe session if you want, but once businesses stop hiring, it's no longer about vibes, it's about actual economic risk. And eventually that works out into consumer spending and a whole bunch of other areas, because as businesses, as employers, if they're not hiring, they're also cutting back costs in a whole number of other ways, including they're investing less. And we've seen that cyclical signal too in terms of non-residential construction. Non-residential construction has fallen off recently too, which is consistent with businesses battening down the hatches, taking more exceptional and extreme measures to protect themselves, even if they don't want to react to the downturn in the economy by firing work. Not just yet. They want to hold on to workers and hoard them as much as they possibly can. And then the other side of that is consumer spending. As workers find it more difficult to get jobs, and as more workers who have jobs realize it's difficult to get jobs and begin to fear what would happen if they're let go, it has this chilling effect all across the economy. And you see that in a slowdown in consumer spending on goods as well as services. Though we don't have enough data on the services side, we sure have a ton of data on the goods side in terms of retail sales. But according to most mainstream media, retail sales look good, just like the lack of layoffs means that we've avoided recession. Nominal retail sales are positive. And so the headlines all across the media were generally positive. The AP said U.S. retail sales ticked up last month in a sign of ongoing consumer resilience. Another one, retail sales stronger than expected in August as consumers keep spending. Reuters said surprise rise in U.S. retail sales points to economy's resilience. And just like they were saying the unemployment rate didn't matter and the payroll report was the only thing you should rely on for judging the health of the economy, they're wrong about this too. And we can see this throughout history. As I said, nominal retail sales to get under 3% year over year, that's in the danger zone. And we look back at retail sales, just to note before we begin here, the retail sales series was redone and rejiggered in 2001. So the current data that we have only goes back to 1992. So we're going to use the old retail sales survey for the period before 1992. But it doesn't really matter. Those two series are pretty much comparable anyway. And what you see again is the 1970s recessions, early 1980s recessions, you don't get a nominal decline in retail sales, but you do get real retail sales declining. That's the key here. That's the one that distinguishes, like hiring, that's the one that distinguishes recessions. For example, 1990-91, nominal retail sales are hanging around 3% year over year before finally falling off in January. But throughout the entire recession, retail sales were mostly positive in their annual comparisons. In 2001, flipping over to the current series on retail sales, what you see is that, again, sales are rising at just under the 3% nominal rate. They never really fall off at any point during the recession. 2007 and 2008, the first half of the Great Not Recession, retail sales, nominal retail sales were at 2.9% in December 2007, and then between 1% and 2% during the first half, really up until August of 2008. So even during the first half of the Great Not Recession, which was on its own right a pretty substantial contraction, had rising unemployment then too, nominal retail sales were not contracting, but they were below 3%. But as I said, it's real retail sales that really distinguishes whether or not the economy is in big trouble. Below 3% nominal terms, contracting in real terms for what should be obvious reasons. Because businesses are getting very little nominal growth at the same time they're selling fewer actual goods. That's a combination that no employer wants to find themselves in. Therefore, they're going to stop hiring new workers, and maybe if it gets bad enough, if the stop hiring new workers leads to slower consumer spending, therefore slower business sales, and therefore less hiring still, the vicious cycle of recession, eventually it gets to the layoffs. So far in 2024, nominal retail sales have been under 3% year over year in every single month except March, and March was only at 3.63%. The 6-month average for nominal retail sales is just 2.73%, which is well within the danger zone. This is what companies all over the spectrum are complaining about. That, along with the fact that real retail sales continue to be negative in most months as well. 6-month average change in real retail sales here in 2024, minus 0.36%. So Americans are buying less stuff and having to pay a little bit more for it. And from the business perspective, they're shipping less stuff, they're making less stuff, they're selling less stuff, and not really getting that much more in revenue. It's the danger zone because that's the point at which employers start thinking even more heavily about controlling their costs, and consumers start thinking more heavily about controlling their spending. The vicious cycle approaches. So it's hiring, not layoffs, that triggered the downturn. The layoffs come at the end as the final confirmation. If you're waiting for the layoffs, you've waited way too long. Real retail sales, not nominal. But even nominal retail sales, when they're below 3%, that's in the danger zone. And the danger zone is where we get all of these processes becoming self-reinforcing to the point that it leads to further consequences, second and third order effects, and it becomes the vicious cycle of recession. We've already seen all of this stuff develop over the last 5 and 6 months to the point that we've got enough recession confirmation, even if it's missing what popular imagination imagines a recession looks like. What a recession actually looks like is lack of hiring and a slowdown in spending. We got those. Well, tomorrow's the most important FOMC meeting in all of history. Will the Fed do 25 or 50, and should we even care? That's something Steve and I talked about in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. Huge thank you, Eurodollar University members and Eurodollar University subscribers. Till next time, take care.